Okay, so this time the microphone is definitely on. This is take two, and I posted a video on Instagram saying that I had forgot to turn this on. We're on now, so let's go back to it. So I see a lot of people on like BookTube, Bookstagram, etc., talking about how they have way too long of a physical TBR, how buying books is a different hobby from reading books, and definitely I've had that same problem in the past. But here are some books that either I have read, that I DNF'd, or that for whatever reason, I'm getting rid of and why. So wanted to talk about it. Wanted to talk about unhauling, um, why we do it, and what the sort of reasons why I personally will donate or give away a book. So starting with some books that I have already read, we're going to start with The Romance Recipe by Ruby Barrett. I have read this. I thought it was fine. I'm not going to reread it. The cover and spine don't really speak to me. They don't super look good on a shelf more than anything else. Pretty plain. So there's no like aesthetic value to it. I'm not going to reread it, and I just didn't really care about the book all that much. So it's getting unhauled because it's just taking up space that I could use for other books. The next one is Love and Other Disasters by Anita Kelly. This one and The Romance Recipe are just not the type of book I normally read. I do read romance. If you look at my Goodreads, it would be crazy for me to say that I don't read romance. Um, just not too often contemporary romance, to be honest, and not too often. These are both about like cooking. This one's about a restaurant. This one's about a cooking show. This one's about a restaurant. So very similar. They're both fun. They're both good. I liked them. I enjoyed them. I think they might have both got 4 stars. Don't love the covers. Nothing too crazy going on the spine. So they're just taking up space. Third from that is one I didn't like very much, which is Murder in the Family by Kara Hunter. Not too sure. I just didn't like this book very much. I love the epistolary style, which is what this book is in. So it has like different sorts of, this is like a call sheet, I think, scripts, things like that, transcripts. It's a mystery. Love that style. Janice Hallett really does that style super, super well. And unfortunately, I feel like she set my bar too high where I can't accept books like this anymore. Where this one tried to be really clever, and I just thought it wasn't very clever. So we're finally getting rid of it. Now, some books I didn't actually finish that I DNF'd. First one, Priory the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I DNF'd this last night. You can try to convince me because currently I still own it, and it will probably sit in my house for another month before it ends up getting donated or given to a friend. But I cracked this mine, so you can tell exactly where I was. 150 of 100 of 80, 800. God, I can't say numbers right now. 800 pages. I just didn't care. It's 4 different stories, there's 4 different perspectives, and I didn't care about any of the characters. I didn't care about any of the one storyline. I didn't care about the lore. I wasn't super engaged by the writing style, and I do read fantasy. Like, it's important to know I do read fantasy, and I read fantasy like this. I just didn't find this very engaging. And by 150 pages, to read 800, you have to hook me pretty soon to get me to read this much of a book because I have to care about something. A lot of the time I say books need to give you the first 100 pages. You need to give them the first 100 pages to buy you in. And I gave it to 150 and just realized I'm not going to remember the details, the lore details, and I just didn't care very much about the characters or anything. So next one is Of Ice and Shadows by Audrey Coulthurst. This is a sequel. I read the first book probably back when it came out, possibly right before this one came out, actually, because I seem to remember seeing the hardcover of this in the bookstore. I liked the first book, but I am now no longer a YA reader, really. I don't think there's any shame or there should be any issue with reading YA or middle grade when you're an adult, but I find it really hard to connect to YA characters. And I especially found it difficult reading this book because some of the things they were doing just felt really silly, like very young. Some of the miscommunication, I don't love the miscommunication trope very much. A lot of that happening it felt very much due to the fact that the characters are incredibly young, and it was hard to read for me. Third of the books that I've DNF'd is Kiss Her Once for Me by Alison Cochrane. tried to read this in December. I've owned it since I think 2022. Uh, Started finally to read it this last December. Just couldn't do it. It had too many pop culture references, and as much as I am a pop culture person, I love pop culture stuff, and a lot of the references were to things I enjoy. I found it really jarring. I find certain pop culture references really date a book and make it really hard to connect to, it gives it very little shelf life. So it can be hard to read when there's a lot of like memes, pop culture, lingo, like things like that. Uh, I don't really enjoy that in a book, and that's a personal preference. Next stack are some nonfiction books that I will be getting rid of. I'm not a huge nonfiction reader, so this is going to be the biggest category that I ever really get rid of, even though all my categories here have been 3 books, and it's purely coincidental, but not a huge nonfiction reader. So the first one is On Writing Well by William Zinsser. I got this for a job, no longer have that job, didn't finish reading this while I had the job, so it's just not going to happen. It's interesting. He definitely has some useful things to say for writing, but he's not super familiar with computers, and that makes it really difficult. He's not really familiar with kind of modern, like really modern stuff, and that makes it difficult as well. Um, I also have a bachelor's in linguistics and English, a master's in publishing, and I'm having to take a bunch of communications and English courses for my college diploma as a law clerk right now, and I just don't think I need this to improve my writing at this stage. There's not a lot that he can tell me that I don't already know through experience or things like that. So I just don't find it super useful for me personally. I know he's a great journalist and writer. It just didn't feel very useful, and I read most of it. I read about 200 of the 300 pages before giving up. Next one is Big Friendship by Amanito Sao and Anne Friedman. So this one, I thought it was going to be more like theory, and it turns out these two are podcasters, and it's just about their friendship. So I just didn't really care that much. If we're being honest, I don't know them. I don't know their podcast. I've never heard of them. So it wasn't that interesting to me. I thought it would be interesting to read a book about friendship, community, and connection because a lot of my close friends are international and live in America or the UK. I'm Canadian for context. And I thought it would be interesting to learn about connection and community across distance and long term. But that's not what the book is. It's just about these two. If you like their podcast, I'm sure it's a great book. And finally, Eminent Outlaws by Christopher Brahm. I got really into historical fiction, especially historical queer fiction recently. This is a book about the gay writers who changed America from sort of the mid-century till the 90s, and it just wasn't what I thought it was as well. I got this at a library sale, which is why it's so shiny, because it still has library binding on it. And so it was pretty inexpensive, but it's just not really what I thought it was. I thought it would be more about the writers and their work, and it was more about their personal lives, which is interesting, but the way he was telling the story just wasn't very interesting to me, and I just wasn't very engaged. I read the first section of it and just didn't really care that much about what he had to add to the authors because a lot of them I had never heard before. And so I wasn't super interested in what their life was like. And with the ones I had heard of, I already knew the stuff he talked about. So there wasn't a whole bunch of new information for me. However, if you're interested, that is the cover. Let's try to make it not shiny for a second. But interesting concept. Didn't love the execution. Again, I think that's kind of a theme with the nonfiction books that I don't read because I don't love nonfiction, if we're being totally honest. Those are the books that I'm unhauling. We'll see how much I need to edit because I know I made a couple mistakes there. Um, but yeah, so do you unhaul books? Why do you unhaul books? Do you DNF books, which means did not finish for those who don't know? Do you stop books while you're reading them, and why? At what point? How long do you give a book to hook you? Are you like a first pager, or like myself, at least 100 pages? I try to give 25%, but couldn't do that with Priory. So why do you unhaul books? Let me know in the comments.